Here on BBC One, right now, the main evening news with Martyn Lewis.
John Major promises other European leaders we will march together, but he urges them not to move too fast. His first summit as Prime Minister gets off to a friendly start, but Germany talks of a need for decisive changes. Inflation is below 10% and falling in the biggest monthly drop for 4 years. Good evening. At the end of the first day of talks at the Rome Summit of European leaders, the British government is tonight confident it is not being pushed into deals on economic and political union it does not want. Mr. Major says the differences between Britain and the other European community countries are on the practicalities of the way forward, not on matters of principle. A spokesman for the Italian government, which holds the presidency of the community until the end of the year, said there was a strong will for harmony in today's discussions and praised the tone of conciliation adopted by Mr. Major.
As the European leaders left after their talks this evening, it became clear that unlike the last Rome summit, a confrontation had been avoided. There was no attempt to exploit the differences between Britain and the other member states, and Mr. Major could afford to look reasonably happy.
Extremely interesting day.
Germany's Chancellor Kohl and the majority who are in favour of a decisive shift towards a federal Europe confirmed their positions. But Mr. Major's approach, stressing Britain's alternative plans, was widely welcomed.
Very positive. Very positive.
The serious problems on political and monetary union will now be left to the intergovernmental conferences, which open tomorrow and will last for much of next year. The President of the European Commission, Jacques Delors, knows their task won't be easy.
No problems.
We wait the beginning of the ECG.
You wait for the beginning of the conference, then?
But
and then there will be problems.
each day, more happy, step by step.
You think it's going to go well? Throughout the day, advocates of a federal Europe have been trying to encourage faster integration. They want a single currency now. Mrs. Thatcher used to argue that the loss of national sovereignty would make economic and monetary union totally unacceptable. Significantly, Mr. Major rests his case on economic grounds, and he doesn't want the Intergovernmental Conference to reach hasty conclusions.
It will examine all these matters in great depth. It will take its time over doing so, and then we will reach conclusions. But let us do it that way.
Sorry, can I just ask this one question? But if you're asked to say, do you accept a single currency as an aim, are you prepared to say yes to that proposition?
That is not the way the question would come or should come, for it is the wrong way to consider the proposition. It's impossible to produce pat answers to questions of that sort at the moment.
That wasn't the straight no Mrs. Thatcher might have given. And tonight, the Dutch Prime Minister, Mr. Lubbers, welcomed what he thought was an important change.
He is fresh, so to say. He starts for the future. He said himself, and we believe that he is very motivated to have his share in the building of Europe.
Mr. Major appears not to have changed British policy, but he's certainly adopted a different approach. He faces the same problems that Mrs. Thatcher did, but he may find it easier to attract allies who could make the differences less damaging for Britain. John Sargent, BBC News, Rome.
Earlier, there was evidence of Mr. Major's conciliatory approach in individual meetings with fellow leaders. The British side described the meeting with Chancellor Kohl as extremely friendly.
Amid the habitual hubbub of a European summit, Mr. Major arrived proclaiming that he was a wholehearted European and wanted to be an enthusiastic shaper of the new Europe. Britain's differences remain, but as a new face, Mr. Major felt it easier to explain them, and the others warmed to his more accommodating style.
Much better for Britain than in the past.
The agenda was potentially explosive. Guidelines for the special conferences to reshape Europe, politically and economically. They're not supposed to start until tomorrow, but Britain feared an attempt to force decisions before it was ready. But the fears proved unfounded. John Major found himself settling down to a comfortable and first-name relationship with Chancellor Kohl.
My German is...
Very good.
You see what a good relationship there is. The Chancellor's helping already, and he's saying it's very good.
Mr. Major had a good very good entry. It was accepted very nicely. The image, also some of your media have created about yourself and the isolated position did not quite cope with reality. Britain was never so far away from things as it sometimes was presented.
And when they began the summit proper, Britain and Germany were soon in harmony on the question of aid to the Soviet Union. Yes, they agreed to a $1 billion package, but they wanted the community officials to think again about how to handle it. And when Chancellor Kohl said the aid was needed not just to ease hunger, but to shore up President Gorbachev against attack by hardliners, Britain agreed.
I think that President Gorbachev is clearly in a difficult position, but it's not so much as an individual, but as it's the policies which he's pursuing. It isn't in the interest of Europe, it isn't in the interest of Britain that the Soviet Union should lapse into anarchy, or that the Soviet Union should fall back into the hands of some backward-looking tyrant.
Tonight, Mr. Major is pleased with the way the day has gone. No one has tried to bounce Britain, and there's no sign of unpleasant surprises tomorrow. Instead, the British think they've detected a willingness to slow down the pace of the community so everybody can move together. Mr. Major's more practical and less dogmatic approach appears to be paying off. Brian Hanrahan, BBC News, Rome.
The differences on economic and political matters between member countries will be discussed in detail in the two intergovernmental conferences, or IGCs, which are to be formally opened in Rome tomorrow. One will cover economic and monetary union, the other political union. Negotiators representing EC, finance and foreign ministers will get down to regular talks in Brussels in January. At monthly meetings, community finance and foreign ministers can review progress. The result will be two agreements for community leaders to approve, possibly in time for the Luxembourg summit in June next year. The agreements must be ratified by the national parliament of each community member before they are written into the community's constitution as amendments to the Treaty of Rome. Joining me from Rome is our economics editor, Peter Jay. Peter, is there still everything to play for at the intergovernmental conferences, or is Britain going to be boxed in simply by the way they're going to work?
Well, Martin, the mood music on the first-class deck at the summit has been absolutely terrific, but the fact is exactly the same icebergs as before are lying in the sea. In the area of economic and monetary union, John Major and his government is still as opposed to an independent central bank, or the European Central Bank, as Mrs. Thatcher's government were. Mr. Jacques Delors has put forward detailed draft treaty amendments which would lead to the setting up of that very bank on the 1st of January 1994, right at the beginning of stage 2. Secondly, it's the Commission's intention, and clearly they have wide backing in the community, to start issuing the single currency for those countries that can and will have it a year or so thereafter, in about 1995. Mr. Major again has made it perfectly clear that he's utterly opposed to an imposed single currency, which means any single currency brought about by a political decision rather than about market forces.
So how soon could Mr. Major's charm offensive be upset by the need to make some pretty tough decisions, some hard choices?
Well, I think the answer has to be as soon as they get down to business. Absolutely nobody in Rome here this week, either at the summit, which ends tomorrow morning, or at the two IGCs, which start tomorrow afternoon. Nobody wants rows, bust-ups, confrontations. The tone has massively changed. But the fact is that the European community, all the other members virtually, and the Commission are determined to have a single currency because they see that as an essential building block in building what they want by the end of this decade, which is a single country with a single government. Now, so long as the British position is that they don't want those things, then it's not just the kind of thing that can be negotiated away in an intergovernment conference. It is a fundamental disagreement of objectives.
Peter, thank you very much indeed. The rate of inflation has had its sharpest fall for 4 years. The retail price index for the year to November rose by 9.7%. That's more than 1% less than a month ago. The underlying rate, leaving out the mortgage rate and community charge, fell to 8%, nearly 0.5% less than a month ago.
It's taken a long time, but last month's cut in mortgage rates ensures that inflation has finally passed its peak. With petrol prices falling by 15 pence a gallon, there was never any doubt that inflation would fall sharply. Opposition parties gave the news a guarded welcome.
I genuinely welcome any fall. However, it must be borne in mind that our inflation remains distressingly high, much higher than that of our competitors, And what is unenviable about our situation is that we've got stagflation, not only high inflation, but a stagnant economy as well, as the recession bites deeper and unemployment mounts.
Well, it may cheer the Prime Minister up a bit, but if you look at the real inflation, the underlying figure, that's hardly gone down at all, and some of the important prices like food and clothing are still going up, and we still have a long-term inflation problem in this country.
To bring inflation down further, industry will need to lower its costs, but other figures out today show this isn't happening.